What kind of sticker did you have?
Down at the library. If you look for a particular property into it, you'll see a photograph of it, and then detailed description of the house, when it was built, who built it, who lived in the house, and stories about the house. And you can glean a lot of information and history and lore of Cotuit by looking at those documents. So I urge everybody to look there and appreciate once again all of the work we've done. Thank you very much.
You know, this is some new history. The history of Grand Island on the Cotuit side. I'm not interested in the Osterville side very much. And I've been aware for a long time, I guess as long as we've lived here, that there's been a very close association between Grand Island and Cotuit. And I always thought that there ought to be a way to document this by getting into the Oyster Harbor's archives. And I started this a long time ago. Jack Van Arsdale started writing the history of Oyster Harbors, and I looked at that. I said, you haven't got anything about the people. There are all kinds of people there, and wonderful houses, and there are wonderful gardens. Many of the gardens were cared for by people from Cotuit. And he said, well, I guess we could fix that. Eventually, the history came out. You've probably seen the history of Oyster Harbors. And it's pretty good. It has a lot of mistakes, though. And I discovered that I'm going to make some mistakes, too. I don't claim to know the whole history, because it's obviously, I've learned it secondhand from a lot of people. But in the process, I figured that I had to get to the archives down in the Oyster Harbors Club. Finally, from a Cotuiter, Zenas Crocker, I got permission. He's president of the Oyster Harbors Homeowners Association. And he very generously let me get into the archives. But he said, the real topic he was very nervous about this, and the reason it took me so long was that he said, they're a mess. And I said, I'll clean them up for you. So I sat down early this year and started organizing the files. And it was just full of old pictures and old documents and wonderful stories and things like that that were just scattered. And so I began organizing these into kind of a sequence from the Cotuit side. And this is what the result is tonight. The history of Grand Island from the Cotuit side. So it's Ghosts and Grandees is the title. More about the Grandees than the ghosts, I suppose, but the history of Grand Island really begins back in the 1600s. This was the attraction for the people to come to the South Sea. That's what they called this Nantucket Sound, the Vineyard Sound, whatever you want to call it, the South Sea. Coming over from Barnstable. The reason they came there was because of the oysters. Apparently this was the perfect oyster raising place. Because the first records we have of this area were people from Hyannis who came over to the Osterville area, to an area to get these oysters from the Indians. They could pick them up, you could just pick them up out of the water, apparently. They grew so thick around here. And so they took these oysters and packed them in barrels of brine and then shipped them off to Newport, New York, and to Boston. So this is 300 years ago that it's been producing oysters around here. So this came from the Oyster River. The Oyster River was the name of the body, the water that runs between Cotuit and Grand Island. And if you can imagine, before the Osterville Cut was made, the way the water ran, there was only a single open between Sampson's Island, what is today Sampson's Island, and Dead Neck. And then you came into Cotuit Harbor, and then you had to go all the way around Grand Island to get to Osterville, which was nothing but a little tiny village in colonial times. And so this was the Oyster River, and just full of oysters. And so this was the main attraction. There was a second reason for this. It was the oyster shells. After these had been shucked by the Indians for hundreds of years, these piled up, huge piles. And they took these oyster shells in colonial times, very early, and burned them down into lime for making chimneys. Because the first chimneys the colonial people had were just logs. And you can imagine a log chimney would catch fire every now and then. Even if it was wet wood. And so that building brick chimneys was one of the first necessities of the colonists back in, I'm talking about the 1650s. So if you might have a log house or a wooden house, but you had to have a brick chimney. So that the mortar for that was very scarce. And when you got that mortar, it was burning this line. That's the reason we think that the area on Old Post Road is called Old Chalky, is that it was where they burned the line, they burned the oyster shells for the line. That's why there are more big piles of oyster shells that were probably very much reduced by this need for mortar. Well, anyway, so this was the attraction of Grand Island, but the Indians prized it so much that when the first settlers came over here and made the deal for the kettle in the hoe, they reserved the whole area of Grand Island, the area up in Marston's Mills River, the entrance to Marston's Mills Road, to themselves. It was just an Indian reservation. It was just something they wanted to keep because it was so precious. Why? Because of the oysters, because of the fishing, and the access to the water. So the deeds then, the early deeds to Cotuit exclude that area of Grand Island. So this was something that the Indians hung on to for a long time, until they got into a lawsuit. A bunch of guys came over from Lovell's neighborhood in Osterville, what was then called Lovell's neighborhood, and began to use Grand Island for pasturing their cattle. The way they got over there was to where the Osterville cut is today. You would have to drive your cattle over at low tide, what they call the wading place. So the cattle came over from what was Dead Neck on the other side, over in Garrison Point actually, Liano, and then you drive your cattle over on the Grand Island. Of course, wonderful pasture along the edges. The inside is probably more heavily wooded the way it is today. Maybe not as heavily as it is today, but the edges have wonderful marsh lands where you have, of course, that's great pasture land. And the Indians protested. And they soon got into a lawsuit between a family of Indians by the name of Wicket, which the white people quickly called Wickets, because they were suing. And the suit went all the way to the Supreme Court of Massachusetts. And the Indians won their case that this had been reserved land for them. One interesting thing that the settlers had agreed to put a fence around the portion on Marston's Mill side, which the settlers never did. They broke the bargain, but the Indians still owned the land. But then the lawyer came along and claimed his bill for the suit. Of course, the lawyer, they had no way to pay for this except by selling the island. So they had to sell it to the Lovells. The Lovells then owned this for approximately, well, the suit was settled about 1723, I think it was. So from 1723 until 1904, this was just a place where the Lovells pastured their cattle, and which they owned. They sold some portions of it to the Hinckleys and a few other families over there. But when Cranberry came along, they laid out a cranberry bog. And you can still see the remnants of that cranberry bog in what was the Cedar Swamp area on this side of the island, on the Cotuit side of the island. But other than that, it was uninhabited. Hunting, probably, but largely a place for cattle. And we have a couple of deeds in the Cotuit Historical Society from the Doddridges to salt works out there. Now, my friend Tommy Corner says there is no way there were any salt works on there, and he pulled out a map to show this. Well, the map only shows 1 year, and it doesn't show Cotuit, it doesn't show Grand Island. You don't know whether there were any salt works out there. But Tommy says there's no way that they would have walked all that way and carried the salt all the way. I said, how about rowing? Maybe they rowed over from Cotuit. Possible. Cotuiters are funny that way. They use water transport. probably goes back in Indian legend. Much of this has to do with the stories that maybe the Indians themselves told about witches and things like that. I've got a Ralph Cahoon. Picture of Hannah Screecham. Hannah's in the to the left of the flag there. Sorry about the quality of the reproduction here, but she's got moves and stars on her dress with a big hat, and she's dancing with the pirate king. Who has a tight leg? You see him? But quite a bit. And out there you can see dead neck behind the pirate flag. You can see the dead necks out there in the pirate ship. And down right here are a bunch of Indian maidens in their canoe and a sailor tied up to a tree to the left. Well, the story goes something like this: that Hannah Screecham and her sister Sarah had a quarrel. Sarah went off on Ashby, but Hannah was not really a witch, but she was a friend of all of these pirates. Now, this particular pirate, I'd like to know which one that is, but the fact is that Captain Kidd probably was in this area. A lot of people think that pirates are all made up, but there's no question that in 1698, Captain Kidd went from New York to Boston and put some of his treasures on Gardiner's Island. And did he put all there, or this is down in New York, or did he stop off in some other places? Well, why not? The Oyster River. And so this is the origin of the pirate story. No one has ever found any of the treasure over there, partly because of Hannah Screecham. Hannah Screecham's role in this was that she was the guardian of the treasure. Captain Kidd made a deal with Hannah Screecham that the treasure would be buried where she indicated on Grand Island, and that a sailor who had dug the hole would be buried in the hole in order to scare off any intruders, including Hannah Screecham. So that is every time that Hannah Screecham tried to dig up the treasure, she would then the gory hands of the sailor would come up out of the grave and start to choke her. So she'd scream, and now this is the sound that we hear over at Noisy Point. You know where Noisy Point is? A lot of people got confused with things. In fact, there's a book about Hannah and it's shown wrong on the map. Noisy Point is on the topographic map. It's just opposite Cotuit. You can't see it as a point from Cotuit, but it's very obvious from Grand Island. It's not that little cove, that little point that goes around the Oyster Harbor's beach. That's The first house built. The first house was not built on Oyster Harbor until 1904. This is directly opposite Cotuit. And this is the Channing House. You can see that it is a very substantial mansion. At the time it was built, however, like all the other houses in Oyster Harbor, was made of wood. It was basically a hunting lodge. The way Professor Channing, who taught American history at Harvard, came there in 1904, he'd been complaining, summered in Nantucket, and he apparently had a discussion about the lack of hunting, or how bad hunting was over in Nantucket. But his boss was Captain Lawrence Lowell, who of course was here to it, summered here to it. And Lowell suggested to him that he take a look at Grand Island. Channing went out there and discovered that this was an ideal spot. There's plenty of American deer, rabbits, whatever else you wanted, and built this summer house here. This was probably built, like the other early houses, by Hamlin and Fish, or their predecessors. Priscilla Kelly is giving me a list of the houses you can find that were built by Hamlin and Fish. It was definitely not built from Osterville, because there was no way to get over the house except by a rickety old bridge. And so this was then built like the first 5 or 6 houses over on this side of the island by builders from Cotuit, who either pulled the stuff over on the ice if it were a hard winter when the ice part freezes over, or more likely just by barge. But you can see the size of that house is such that roof would require a lot of big timbers and a lot of building material. So Cotuit builders were very skillful in getting this across the water, building this house. And probably got over there the same way that Professor Channing got his mail. They rode over, all the builders, the workmen, rode over. He would come over every day to get his mail in what is a thing called Old Shore Road, the old post office before it moved down into the center of the village. It's a little house on the south side of the Main Street and Old Shore Road. The house, the post office is still there. But when Professor Channing rode across the water, Algernon Coolidge, who lived in the house on the bluff about where Nicky Moore's house is today, behind actually Moore's house, Algernon Coolidge would yell at him, faster, faster, or sure water, some provocative remark. They were old friends. So this is where people in Grand Island got their mail. They came over, they rode over to do a pickup the mail, and then drove back again. All of this survived. Of course, they got their supplies from the grocery over here too. They didn't go into hospital. And so this was the beginning of the summer colony. President Lowell decided that if the island could be bought, and could be bought very cheaply, the way to protect Professor Channing from being surrounded by intruders was now there's the way Grand Island was built from Cotuit about 1904. Notice that there's only one house there. And you can see the size of Professor Channing's house. That's right on Noisy Point. Door entry. You see the thing to the left, where down here, right there is where that big sandbank was recently covered over with Rosa rugosa and by beach grass. Tim's Point is over here, so the Oyster Harbor Fund is there. So this was recently covered over. It's only been the last 2 years that it looked like a big wave. probably built by a Cotuit builder. Again, Hamlet and Fish is my candidate for it, but we've never been able to find out. But the next house was built, you'd hardly recognize because it has been so altered. Built pretty much the same year, probably the same summer by Hamlet and Fish. This was the field house. This house was actually now is on the 11th fairway of the Oyster Harbor's club. You can see it very directly from it. This is the way you see it from the back. You see it's been converted into a garage down below, but has a very handsome entrance. And the Fields, who were from Boston, had, we believe, Guy Lowell of Cotuit designed this house. Now, this is not the way it would have looked to Guy Lowell because it's been moved and they've changed so many times. But Guy Lowell designed at least two of the houses over on Oyster Harbor. We'll see another one shortly. Seapuit. And this was a surgeon from Salem who was a friend of the family's, fisheries, the Cotuit families here. He thought that the best view was up on the high height overlooking Seapuit, looking out of Nantucket Sound. And this was the house that he built. And we know the initials of the architect, our Boston architect, but we haven't figured out who that architect is. I've got to go back up to Boston and to look at the architectural directory to see if I can identify it. But we know definitely that this house, Dr. Fitton's house, was built by Hamlet and Fish from Cotuit. And they actually brought the materials over on the ice so that winter of 1911 across the ice over to Grand Island, up Seapuit River, and built this wonderful thing. Look at the wonderful windows in the center portion here. This is two stories high. This is the sort of thing people got to design before they had plate glass windows. It's all this, and it has a balcony running around the top of that cathedral ceiling in that living room, the big center living room. This house has been pretty much kept as it's been modernized. George Edmonds has done a lot to make it more comfortable, but it still looks very much like it did when it was built. Kind of nice, and the interesting thing about you can't see it up on the ceiling there is a steel beam that Hamlet and Fish of Cotuit brought over, jacked up somehow up to the second story above those tall windows there to hold the water. The water, of course, each one of these houses had to be supplied by water from a well. The well is still out there. You can see a pump on where the well is, and the water had to be pumped up to the ceiling in order to get the water pressure. All these houses, of course, were dependent on that kind of water for their water supply. recognize this is the Mellon House, one of the Mellon houses. The Platts, Freddie Platt had an aunt whom they called Freddie's crazy aunt. And Freddie Platt's aunt would go bathing, start moves right out there in Seapuit River. They built a prefab house for her. This is about a quarter of a mile away on Grand Island from the spot house that I just showed you. And she had two German housekeepers who took care of her during the summer. And then during the winter, she would return to her apartment. Now this development has a wonderful state. It used to be Freddie Platt's crazy out.
Jane, when was the Platt house torn down?
My house was torn down about 1970, somewhere. This house was built in 1916.
I've tried.
Squeeze them or spread them apart?
This house is still standing, and you may be able to recognize it. This is Dr. Reno's house. Dr. Reno, again, one of these families that were that's the other side of the Reno house. This is the Grand Island side. And this is very much as it was today. I think this has been changed very little since 1960. It's been modernized in the interior. This is a nice example of kind of big summer mansions that were, again, built from Cotuit. Let's see if this is, I think this was designed by Guy Lowell. Guy Lowell, you know, was designed our library and the Unitarian Church in Barnstable. But this is an example of the kind of domestic architecture that Guy Lowell made, neo-colonial or colonial revival style. Dr. Reno was an interesting person. He shook the medical world. Many people say it's a turning point in American medical history. His presidential address to the American College of Surgeons in 1937, he said that we ought to have prepaid health insurance, that everybody ought to be insured. You can imagine what the furor of that was in the Republican Boston. Very radical idea. Then his sister, a view looking from the Cotuit Harbor Road across the marsh there. And it isn't very scenic there, but there are a number of houses along there. Oh, the Reno, the Platte, the houses have all been built. So you know that this photograph must be about 1917 because of the string of houses up there. And you probably recognize this house is still standing. Jim Gould house. That was built by Oysters, who was the longest serving secretary of the AT&T actually. He married the niece of the founder of AT&T and built this large mansion. You can see this is probably the biggest one on that side. And this was built about 1917, I think, 1921, after the war. We don't know the architect. I don't think I was active at this time. This was the nephew of Oysters, was a famous Dartmouth quarterback who was one of the real football heroes of the pre-war years. 1937, I think, was the class at Dartmouth. And that house has been very nicely maintained, still much in the same condition. Behind that is the cedar swamp I was talking about. Now, in the next step in the development of Grand Island was when Forrest Norris, the developer of Grand Island, bought up all of the remaining property. And this is the homestead, famous landscape architect's map of Oyster Harbor. So you can see they're laid out all the golf courses, which were done in 1925 and 1926, in the center of the island, and the round place at the top stolen, why they stolen, nobody knows. Great mystery. Incidentally, here, on the other side of the island, is the more likely place that the Indians would have buried their dead. We have a number of Indian burials. We have a number of Indian burials around the waters here, and they're usually facing west. The story we get from the Manawas is that this was part of their religion, that one buried the body facing toward the setting sun, where the person would then go on into the other world to join his or her ancestors. So the more likely place for a buried body, buried Indian bodies, is over on the point, probably in front of the houses that have already been built. The interesting thing is that when they were leveling the lawn of one of those houses over there, some 30, 40 years ago, they did come across some remains of, and they were not properly identified. I don't know what's happened to them, whether they were buried, reburied. Nothing professional was done about it. But there's a curious story attached to this. The Carol Fulton, Carol Crocker, actually, born Crocker from the Cotuit family, got a seance to see to identify these bodies. And I have written to Mrs. Fulton in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and asked her to tell me the story about what happened at the seance. And I haven't gotten a reply out of her. I don't know if she's embarrassed to tell me what the seance was about. But they did apparently communicate with the spirits. Tell me that story when I find it out from the book. Oh, she married Fred Fulton, by the way, was killed, lived in that house, was killed during the war. He was a pilot on the B-2 bomber over. So this is the way Grand Island looked with those big mansions. So this is the plaque. Oysters down here. And the fairway. So we know this is after it was taken, about 1927, after all the big mansions had been built. The symbol of Oyster Harbor is a windmill. It's the logo. The first windmill was built in this house. This is up on the point North Bay. And trying to get the windmill in there. Windmill. There's the windmill. This is Dr. Wild's house. Dr. Wild was an Army surgeon from South Carolina who had this house built up on the north point. This was the bad side of the island. Nobody wanted to be up there. Everybody wanted to look at the sunset, looking over toward Cotuit. And so for a long time, this was unbuilt. Much cheaper land up on North Bay there. Dr. Wild built this house. The reason that it doesn't have the windmill bays on it was the hurricane, the 38 hurricane is the Marston house that's up on Route 28. Where they were digging up the street in the last week or so, where it was all rough and so on, that little hill there between the Marstonville's Pond and the Cotuit Landing was where this house stood until 1928. This was the Memphis Marston house. We don't know how old it is. It could go all the way back until the middle of the. What's that? This is the way it looked when it was standing up on Route 28. Before the straight Route 28. This is on the north side of the road. You see a big salt box, colonial house. This house belonged to one of the wealthy Marston family that ran the woolen mills in Marston's Mills. This belonged to Judge Memphis Marston, who was the town moderator at the time of the Revolution. And during the Revolution, the town of Barnesville voted against independence. And so he was always a little bit embarrassed about that until the soldiers came marching up from Falmouth after the defense of the town of Falmouth. And he invited them in for a drink. They went into the dining room, which is on this left, not where the corner of the house is, into the dining room. And after browsing a little bit, one of the soldiers let his bus get off by accident and blew a great big hole in the ceiling. Judge Marston insisted on keeping the ceiling blasted like that as evidence of his patriotism. And it stayed that way until 1928, when the house was flaked, actually taken apart and put onto a barge, and then taken over to Grand Island. The house sits on Grand Island, the south side of Grand Island, was moved over by the J.H. Williams family, who also had one of those original houses along the waterfront there. And this is J.H. Williams, who was a wife of a big Texas rancher. Fixed the house up. Now, I'm afraid plastered the ceiling. I've been trying to persuade the Mellons to let me go in and look and see if I can see it, but I'm sure they didn't leave the hole in the ceiling. It's had another owner after the Mellons, and I suspect one of those owners managed to patch it up. And it had a lot of additions on the back of it. It had been very much older. You can still recognize the square form of the previous picture I had. You would recognize this house. This is the Crocker house. Crocker's Cotuit. The Crocker houses are still standing up on Route 28. And they were the original owners of most of the land in Cotuit. Zenas Crocker the fifth. There are now 8. There's Zenas Crocker the 8th. Zenas Crocker the 5th. And grown up in Cotuit, just loved Grand Island and decided that he would build a house over on Grand Island. Built this house, very much as you can see the sort of the summer style that was favored by the other. The story is that now he will upside down. That's the house you see today. There's the house in Walmart. This was the person who transformed it most was Andy Edmonds, who you probably remember as the harbor master. Made himself assistant harbor master. That's great to hear out on all kinds of fancy boats. This is the way the Crocker house looked originally. I've got it. I won't show you how they hold it today. You wouldn't recognize it. chapel. Some of she had on the left-hand side of the house there was a great big cathedral ceiling studio where she did her sculpture. And north light coming in, we're looking at it from the west. And so we're looking out toward Knoxville, toward North Bay. The Wilds house is to the left, to the left of this. So this was the bachelors were very much involved in Cotuit sailing and participated with the neighbors in creating the Oyster Harbor's Yacht Club. The Oyster Harbor's Yacht Club had an annual regatta and an animal regatta where the prizes were various stuffed animals, like teddy bears and so forth. Wonderful yacht club, run by the bachelors and the dancers. There's a whole string of houses that were built in the 1920s, and this was 1928, 29. Just as an example of what happens when the Great Depression comes along and ruins everybody. They keep on building. This is the big building. Don't stop building when the Depression comes. This is another one of the houses that was built about this time. I'll go a little more quickly now. Stop. And so here are the attractions of Oyster Harbor. I think there's some neat comments to it here. See if I can get. Unsurpassed. Baby. I don't know who did this. I think it's inside. My comments over the archive. Unsurpassed baby. You can see about the things mode. There's the claw. Unlimited loading facility. Taking out on that dead net.
What year was this at?
About 1927.
27.
That was a great comment. Let me see, I'll read the comments and then look back again. Average summer water temperature 72 degrees. Clam bakes and picnics out on Big Neck. Unlimited loading facilities on the beach. Safe anchoring in Cotuit. Peacock fishermen and a moment of relaxation over near Brooks Beach. Men at work, not a common sight. And maintaining a picture of Point Isabella. Peacock pines and woods are full of them. Even the very young may bathe safely. Brilliant play on the Donald Ross golf course, and just the right company. The seaplane taking up. The DuPonts are great seaplane enthusiasts. And seaplane regattas over in Jim's Cove, so you can look across and see all the seaplanes around. I just remember when they still it's still creaked. And the people who have lived in the house, the Pellegrinos had a story about how all the curious sounds that come around in that house. One of the things they claim is that their dog runs out of the house and goes down to Hannah Screecham's house, which isn't too far away, and would bark just furiously at Hannah Screecham or something like that. That's full of ghosts. The house across the way, which I don't have a picture of, Fairways, was actually the staff house of the Oyster Harbor Club, and that is supposedly haunted also. This house is still standing. This was built at the height of the Depression, 1932, by Joe Carney, who became Quaker revenue of the state of Massachusetts, friend of the Kennedys and a lot of the Democratic politicians. Franklin Roosevelt's son, James, was a close relative and often visited there. And we have a picture of James Roosevelt's boat off the Carney's house here, which he came outside and visited. This house, you can see, looks a lot like the Crocker house. This was the Danforth house. The Danforth started fox hunting on Grand Island. And they had no active foxes at the time they used the drag hunt, in which they dragged the dead body of a fox and made the trail for them. The Danforths were active horse enthusiasts. There was big stables over a little island. That house is no longer standing because this is what was replacing, but with a house in between. The people who came and bought the Danforth house thought it was too large, tore it down, put in a modern house, and then when they decided they wanted to live on the other side of the island, that house was torn down, and this one was put up. This is the one you see today. Notice that it's not unlike people can't make up their minds how big a house they want to put on the Grand Island. This is the way it looked from the water originally. That was the kind of front we see from Cotuit when the original Danforth house. This is Cedar Thread, still standing, built by the Boyds in 1934. We have the Boyds here. As you can see, the Depression discouraged people from building large mansions.
That's a copper roof on it.
That's a tower. And then, another tower has been added on the other side, on the shore side, which you see from the water. You can't see the house today at all from the water because the trees are growing so much. After this came the 38 hurricane, 44 hurricane, and all the hurricane tower and all the others. This has a connection. This is the Rosewood house. I shouldn't call it the house. It's called a cottage, we call it, because it was so much smaller and more manageable than the house she had in Cotuit. Evergreen, which you know is down on just below Cockman Point, was at one time the sort of the dormitory for the Pines Hotel. It had been built by Adele Rollison. And when they had a number of tragedies, a number of their sons were killed. She had 2 marriages, and several of her sons died tragically, one in a plane crash, another in an automobile crash. And finally, when their Chicago house burned down, the story about the fire was that the mahogany paneling in the study had oiled so much that the fumes from that ignited, and the whole house burned down. Her son died in that fire. And so she gave up her Cotuit house, which I think still is the largest house in Cotuit, and moved over to Grand Island, to the place, you remember where the bridge was to have been over to Grand Island and over to Dead Neck. That would have been reserved as a place for the access over to Dead Neck. By this time, that is in 1940, they had given up the idea of having the polo field out there and the access across there. And so Adele Rose built what she called a cottage. This was small compared to Evergreen, but you can see it's not a small house at all. 1940, they still in the Depression. What's most interesting thing about this house, this is only one of 3 houses on the property. There's a house that is of fairly modest size right next to it, built for Alexander Reed, the gardener. The Reed family, they know in Cotuit, were the gardeners for Evergreen. He was a Scottish, both Reeds, Mr. Reed, both Scots. Adele Rose was brought in for her gardens. Her specialty was delphiniums. She opened this up to this house here, her cottage, for a garden club benefit shortly after it was built. And everybody raved about her wonderful delphiniums, which were, of course, grown by Alexander Reed. But he had a good-sized gardener's cottage. Finally, a house you recognize, sometimes called erroneously the Frank Lloyd Wright house. Really a little digging to find out who actually did. It doesn't look like Frank Lloyd Wright at all. But it's different from all the houses on Grand Island. This is not on Seapuit. And this was designed by a Belmont architect by the name of Carl Cote, for the Estes family. The Estes were in the textile business. He was head of the J.D. Stevens textile mills, one of the largest textile producers. The interesting thing about this house is just the number of glass windows. The whole front, there are big panes of glass. Very, very unlike Grand Island. No particular Cotuit connection to it, but I thought that was the example of how we could get by with building code. The covenant, every house on Grand Island, there are now about 100 of them, said you must have no flat roofs. That looks flat to you, but it actually has a 1 in 12 slant to it, so you can get by with it. Probably the reason they got by with it, I suspect, was that Oysters Harbor's club was going through one of its periodic reorganizations. If they look very stable to you, it's because they had people like the Floyds who periodically bailed them out, and the Ellens who bailed them out. So don't envy the people who live on Oysters Harbor. They're always worried about whether the clubhouse is actually solved. So there's a little bit of history of Grand Island. It's good time. I hope I've tried to answer any questions. Yes?
Did you have to live there year round? Or those all summer places?
Year round? before Cotuit, Seapuit, they were great gardeners. Partly, I gather, I got to confirm this, is that a lot of them were farmers in the Azores and had come over here with farming skills, took jobs in the mills in New Bedford and Fall River, and when there were strikes or periodic depressions or something, they'd come out and they set up really beautiful farmhouses in Seapuit. They buy an acre of land and turn it into a garden. And apparently these were, I just got a letter from a woman today who was telling me about how she remembered the strawberry patches out in the back of these houses and all the vegetables, things that they would raise in these houses, sell out in front or come bring carts down Main Street for fresh produce. These Portuguese were great gardeners, great caretakers, and many of these estates were maintained by these Portuguese families.